Ilara's sanctuary was a lie woven of quiet desperation and necessity, a small, isolated cabin nestled deep within the fringe territory, far enough to breathe, close enough to the whispers of the civilized world for supplies. For 6 years, the scent suppressants had been her nightly ritual, a chemical prayer to the moon goddess to keep her and Orion, her light-haired boy, invisible. But secrets, like wolves, always found a way home. The first sign of the intrusion was the unsettling stillness of the forest, the usual cacophony of nocturnal life suddenly silenced by a greater predator. Ilara was kneading dough, the rhythmic motion a balm to her perpetual anxiety, when the cabin door burst inward, splintering wood and shattering glass. Standing silhouetted against the weak moonlight was Rorik, the beta of the Crimson Claw Pack, a man whose reputation for brutality was second only to his alphas. His eyes, the colour of wet moss, pinned her to the spot. Ilara of the Shadow Pack. Rorik's voice was a low growl, laced with malicious satisfaction. The alpha has grown tired of waiting. Orion, who had been drawing on the floor, immediately scuttled behind his mother, a small hand clutching the edge of her skirt. The boy was 6, bright and fearless, but his nascent wolf instincts, dormant, Ilara hoped, registered the danger in the air. "What do you want?" Ilara managed, her voice steadier than her pounding heart. She placed herself squarely between Rorik and her son, the table a fragile barricade. "Protect him, always protect him. The ancestral debt, Ilara, your grandfather's folly. The full payment is due." Rorik stepped closer, his lichen scent overpowering the herbs she'd burned. He gestured to the boy with a careless flick of his wrist. "The Alpha demands your child as the final payment." The words struck her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Her life's purpose, the single reason she existed, was suddenly the price of an ancient mistake. The absurdity of a child being currency was overshadowed only by the terror of Kaelin Thorne, the Alpha of the Crimson Claw. Kaelin was a legend, a tyrant of cold calculation, the most powerful Lycan in the northern regions, who ruled with a fist wrapped in shadow. She knew him, or, at least, she knew the ghost of the man he'd once been, a shadow that haunted her sleepless nights. But this demand was beyond the pale. "No," she whispered, then louder with a surge of Packless' fierce maternal instinct. "No! He has nothing to do with this debt." Rorik smirked, a cruel twist of his lips. "The Alpha's orders are absolute, collateral, a guarantee of compliance. You will bring the boy to the Crimson Claw Fortress at moonrise in 2 days. Fail, and we will collect you both in pieces." He didn't wait for a response, disappearing as quickly as he had arrived, leaving behind the acrid smell of ozone and the gaping, broken door, a metaphor for her shattered peace. Ilara sank onto her knees, pulling Orion into her embrace. The boy looked up at her, his emerald eyes wide, a striking contrast to her own dark, shadowed gaze. They were her eyes, yes, but there was a flicker of gold in their depth, a familiar, terrifying shade that she had spent 6 years praying no one would ever see. A shade that belonged only to the Thorne lineage. Kaelin's eyes. The Alpha's eyes. She had to go. She had to face the monster she'd fled, the man who was now demanding his own flesh and blood. The true danger was not the debt, but the possibility of Kaelin seeing past her suppression, seeing the truth reflected in his son's gaze. The clock had started ticking on her 6-year lie. The Crimson Claw Fortress was less a home and more a monolithic statement of dominance. Built into the face of a jagged black rock mountain, its jagged towers pierced the sky, a perpetual shadow over the surrounding territory. Ilara walked the final mile, clutching Orion's small hand, the fear a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She hadn't run. Running now would only guarantee their capture and a worse fate. She came to negotiate, to barter her own life for her son's freedom. Orion, sensing the oppressive power of the place, huddled closer to her side. His small wolf, still unshifted, radiated a nervous energy. The guards at the gate, massive Lycans with the pack's crest emblazoned on their armour, watched them with detached, predatory interest. Inside, the fortress's atmosphere was a suffocating mix of power and discipline. No wasted movement, no unnecessary noise. She was escorted through high-vaulted corridors to the Alpha's private office, a chamber designed for intimidation. The massive desk was carved from obsidian, and behind it, bathed in the eerie, blood-red light filtering through the tall windows, sat Alpha Kalen Thorne. He was even more formidable than the image she had carried in her mind, taller, broader, his shoulders straining the expensive fabric of his suit. His hair was the colour of midnight, swept back from a severe, angular face, and his eyes, the eyes that had once held a reckless, searing passion, were now pure, glacial gold, devoid of warmth, radiating absolute, merciless power. He was a king of shadows, and she, a fugitive Omega, was his new supplicant, Ilara, he stated, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that echoed in the vast room, a sound that stirred a traitorous, long-dormant tremor in her core. The way he spoke her name, a simple sound, was a command. He hadn't moved, yet the air was charged with his presence. "Alpha Thorne," she replied, forcing herself to meet his gaze. She pushed Orion slightly behind her, her body language screaming protection. Kalen's eyes finally drifted to the boy. His golden gaze swept over Orion, a cursory, uninterested glance that lasted a beat too long. Orion, usually so lively, held his breath, his eyes wide and fixed on the powerful male. "The collateral," Kalen said, his tone flat and businesslike, as though discussing a commodity. "I trust you have reviewed the terms of the debt. The child stays here. Your part is complete, Ilara. You may leave." The casual cruelty of his words ignited a familiar fury in her. "He is not collateral. He is an innocent child. I will pay the debt, every last cent. Take me. Keep me as your prisoner, your servant, your slave, whatever you want. But let him go." Kalen finally moved, leaning back in his chair, a shadow of an amused, dangerous smirk touching his lips. "You mistake yourself for valuable, Omega. You were never more than a temporary distraction. The boy's lineage, however, is a different matter. He stays." He paused, his golden eyes narrowing, his wolf beginning to stir at the unusual challenge. "Take her to the guest wing, Rorik. Ensure she does not leave without my permission, and tell the nurse to prepare the boy's room." He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, utterly unconcerned with her plight. Ilara's knees felt weak, not just from fear, but from the unbearable proximity of the male who had once been everything, and was now demanding the one thing she could never surrender. Never surrender. The next morning was a suffocating blend of high anxiety and forced proximity. Ilara was confined to a luxurious but guarded guest suite, a gilded cage. Orion, meanwhile, was placed in the care of the pack's nurse, a formidable woman who regarded Ilara with undisguised suspicion. Ilara was only allowed brief supervised visits, a new form of torture designed to break her spirit. During one such visit in the fortress's immaculate gardens, Orion was attempting to climb a stone bench, and Ilara caught him just before he tumbled. A sudden, sharp sound, a commanding howl, echoed from the training grounds, signalling the Alpha's presence. Orion instantly froze, his small head tilting toward the sound, his emerald eyes flashing with that familiar, almost imperceptible gold spark. He didn't seem scared. He seemed attuned. The Alpha appeared then, emerging from the edge of the grounds, still clad in sweat-dampened training gear that did nothing to hide the lean, formidable power of his physique. He was talking to his beta, Rorik, an intense, low conversation. As he drew closer, his wolf's scent, a potent, intoxicating mix of pine, snow, and raw dominance, began to saturate the air. Orion suddenly pulled free of Ilara's hand and stumbled a step toward Kalen. It was a purely instinctual movement, an animal drawn to its son. Ilara lunged forward, grabbing Orion and pulling him back hard, her movement frantic and desperate, the sudden, sharp scent of her desperation, combined with Orion's small, unique wolf scent, a scent she had tried to suppress for years, hit Kalen. The Alpha stopped dead in his tracks. His conversation with Rorik dissolved into a heavy silence. Kalen's head snapped up, his golden eyes fixing on the boy, not with cold detachment, but with a sharp, piercing focus. His nostrils flared, drawing in the scent, analysing it, his brow furrowed in a confusion that was rapidly morphing into something more feral, more instinctive. The Alpha's scent, which had been merely potent, now flared into an overwhelming musk of confusion, possession, and raw lichen shock. It was the blood scent. Familiar. Unmistakably lichen. Unmistakably Thorne. Ilara felt the shift in the atmosphere, The air itself seemed to crackle with Kaylin's rising internal storm. The casual disdain was gone, replaced by a sudden, terrifying biological recognition. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, losing drumbeat. She should have run. She should have let Rorik take her. Kaylin took a single, slow, deliberate step toward them. "Rorik," he growled, the name a warning, his eyes never leaving Orion. "Leave us." Rorik hesitated, a mistake that earned him a look from his alpha that promised agonizing pain. He backed away quickly, melting into the shadows. Kaylin stopped a few feet away, his gaze moving from the boy's striking eyes, down to the light blonde hair, then back to the boy's fierce, defensive stance, a stance he knew all too well. He inhaled deeply, the lichen in him reeling from the undeniable truth. He looked at Alara, his golden eyes blazing with accusation and utter disbelief. "How?" The word was a choked, guttural sound, tearing from his chest. "Alara, whose son is he?" She held her ground, clutching Orion tighter, the lie finally dying on her lips. "He is mine," she whispered defiantly, "and the debt is still mine." She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of the full truth, not yet. She wouldn't surrender her son's father to the monster she had always known he was. Kaylin didn't need the full truth. The scent, the eyes, and the defiant way Alara guarded the boy were more than enough. The world narrowed to the scent of his son, his firstborn, and the realization that this quiet Omega had kept the most profound truth from him for 6 long years. "Don't insult me." "Alara," Kaylin's voice was dangerously low, a tremor of rage running beneath the controlled surface. He took another step, towering over them. "The scent, it is mine. Tell me his name." Orion, perhaps sensing that the great, frightening male was not immediately hostile to him, looked up at Kaylin with a strange mix of apprehension and curiosity. "My name is Orion," the boy stated clearly, lifting his chin in a gesture that was shockingly similar to the Alpha's own posture. The sound of his name, spoken by his son, detonated something deep inside Kaylin. The ruthless Alpha was momentarily usurped by the shocked, possessive lichen. He reached out a massive hand, the movement slow, almost hesitant, toward Orion's face. Alara intercepted the move, batting his hand away with a ferocity that surprised even herself. "Don't touch him!" she hissed, her eyes sparking with unshed tears and years of repressed bitterness. "He doesn't know you." "You are the man who demanded him as a prize, Kaylin. A repayment for a debt that has nothing to do with him." The truth of her accusation hit him. He had demanded his own son as collateral. The shame was a cold spear of pain, swiftly followed by a blinding possessive rage at Alara for the deception. "You kept him from me." Kaylin roared, his voice shaking the stones of the fortress. The lichen in him was demanding retribution, demanding his pup. "You left me to die," Alara shot back, the words laced with 6 years of isolation and fear. After what happened, you chose your alpha duties, your pack, your destiny. You made your choice, Kaylin. You never looked back. I was forced to run to protect him from your world, from your enemies." The raw honesty of her pain made him falter. He remembered the hurried, desperate parting, the political turmoil, the necessity of his ascension. But he had searched, hadn't he? Half-heartedly, perhaps, his grief masked by the rigours of leadership, but he had believed her gone, lost to the chaos. He certainly hadn't imagined her carrying his child. "I searched for you," he said, his voice dropping, the volume controlled, but the intensity magnified tenfold. "I believed you were dead." "Why did you not contact me? I would have claimed him, claimed you both," Alara scoffed, a bitter, broken sound. "Claim me? After you demanded I leave? You, the great Alpha, would have been burdened with an Omega mate and a secret pup, whose very existence threatened your position. You needed to be strong, Kaylin. I made you strong by disappearing, and I protected Orion from the Alpha you had become. Orion, confused and a little frightened by the raw emotion between the two dominant beings, looked from one to the other, then buried his face in his mother's skirt. Kaylin watched the movement, the boy's reliance on Alara. A fierce jealousy, a primal possessiveness flared in his chest. His wolf was howling. His son, his heir, stolen from him. "From this moment forward, the debt is paid," Kaylin declared, his voice final, absolute. He met Alara's gaze, his golden eyes burning with a new, terrifying resolve. You will both remain here.
You are my mate.
He is my son. And the lie is over, Elara. You belong to the Crimson Claw, both of you. It was not an invitation, but a command, one that closed the door on Elara's freedom forever. Elara's freedom forever. The Alpha's declaration changed everything and nothing. Elara and Orion were no longer hostages. They were officially claimed, a fact that sent a shockwave through the disciplined, ordered pack. But claiming them didn't mean acceptance. Kaelin moved them into the Alpha's private wing, a stark, luxurious prison that put Elara in constant, agonizing proximity to him. She avoided him with the skill of a seasoned fugitive, but the fortress was his territory, and he was everywhere. His scent, which had once been a comfort, was now a constant reminder of her captivity and his ultimate power. Orion, however, was thriving. Unaware of the political danger he represented, he was drawn to Kaelin with the undeniable pull of blood. The boy spent hours in the Alpha's office, drawing pictures of wolves and pointing to constellations on the giant globe. Kaelin, the cold, ruthless leader, was strangely, undeniably different with his son. The golden eyes would soften, and he would answer Orion's endless stream of questions with surprising patience. Elara watched these interactions from a distance, the sight a confusing blend of pain and unexpected relief. The part of her that was a mother wanted her son to have a father, even this father. But the part of her that was a woman, the one who had fled his betrayal, was terrified by the tenderness she saw. One evening, Kaelin cornered her in the library, a vast room that smelled of old paper and his own musky scent. He had a glass of amber liquid in his hand, and his composure was tight, as if he were holding a great beast on a leash. "We need to discuss this, Elara," he said, his back to the massive fireplace. "The pack is restless. They do not know why I've claimed a hidden Omega and her child after 6 years. And what do you want me to say, Alpha?" she challenged, her arms crossed tight over her chest. "That I made a mistake? That I should have allowed you to discard me and our child for the good of the pack?" He sighed, a heavy sound of weariness that was deeply uncharacteristic. "I did not discard you. I thought you were dead." "I grieved." He set the glass down with a thump. "When I found you were alive, I was enraged. Not because you were a threat, but because you stole my son's life, Elara. You stole my chance to be a father. You deprived the Crimson Claw of its true heir." "He is not a piece of property, Kaelin," she retorted, stepping closer, her temper finally snapping. "And your heir is the least of my concerns. You did not grieve. You moved on. You became the cold, powerful Alpha you always aspired to be. Don't try to paint yourself as the victim." Kaelin's expression hardened, his lichen dominance returning with a vengeance. He closed the distance between them in 2 powerful strides, his scent overwhelming her senses. He was too close, too powerful, too much of the male she had once loved. "I moved on to survive, Elara," he growled, pinning her with his gaze. "But every choice I made, every cold decree, created the power base that now ensures your safety. And that of my son." He leaned down, his breath warm against her ear, the intimacy electrifying and terrifying. "I have claimed you. We are fated, Elara, and I will not allow you to run again. You and Orion will learn your place here. You will be my mate, and he will be my heir. The scars of our past are secondary to the future I demand for us. You will belong to me." Life at the fortress became a strained dance of avoidance and undeniable attraction. Elara found herself constantly fighting the primal pull of the mate bond, a connection she had tried to sever with sheer force of will for 6 years. Kaelin's presence, his scent, the way his golden eyes would track her, movements, all of it spoke to a destiny she had run from but could not outrun, the pack's reaction to the sudden appearance of the Alphas. Sun and the Omega, he claimed, was varied, but generally uneasy. The older members were suspicious of Elara's long absence, and a few of the more ambitious wolves saw Orion as a threat to their own positions. Kaelin's authority, however, was absolute, and no one dared to openly challenge his claim. The true conflict was happening in the shared space of the Alpha's wing. Kaelin insisted on daily shared meals, a calculated move of forced proximity. He spoke little to Elara, his communication mostly limited to commands or questions about Orion's day. But the silence was charged, heavy with unspoken history, resentment, and a lingering desire that neither could completely suppress. One evening, Orion was restless, suffering from a low-grade fever, a common affliction when a young lycan's bond to a parent is disrupted. Ilara was sitting by his bed, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead, her heart aching. Kaelin entered the room, his movements silent, the deep concern in his eyes overriding his alpha mask. He walked over to the bed and placed his hand, the same massive, intimidating hand that commanded the pack, on Orion's small, flushed forehead. His touch was surprisingly gentle, radiating a soft, focused heat. "The boy needs his pack bond," Kaelin murmured, his voice husky with worry. "He is Lycan, Ilara. He needs the Alpha's grounding energy. Yours is not enough." Ilara didn't argue. She had tried everything, and Orion was still struggling. She watched as Kaelin took his son's hand, the contrast in size stark, and closed his eyes. He began to emit a low, guttural purr, the wolf's sound of comfort and security, channeling his powerful life force into the boy. The room filled with the warm, protective surge of Kaelin's energy. Orion sighed, the tension leaving his small body, and his breathing smoothed out almost instantly. He was calm, safe, claimed. Ilara felt the edges of that warmth. The Alpha's calming energy did not stop at Orion. It reached out, brushing against her own tense psyche, soothing the anxiety that had been her constant companion. It was the mate bond, a silent, comforting communication that bypassed all their years of bitterness and silence. Tears welled in her eyes. This was the male she had fallen in love with, the protector, the one who would lay down his life for his own. He was still there, buried beneath the Alpha's ruthless exterior. Kaelin opened his eyes, his gaze finding hers in the dim light. He saw the naked pain and the undeniable softening in her expression. He didn't speak. Instead, he reached out, not to touch her, but to offer a silent concession, a small, almost imperceptible tilt of his head. "He is yours, Ilara," Kaelin said, his voice quiet, sincere. "I see that, but he is also mine. We will raise him, together." It was the closest he had come to an apology, an acknowledgement of her suffering and her right to her son. It was the first honest step toward an impossible future, a crack in the fortress walls they had both built around their hearts. The shared concern for Orion created an uncomfortable truce, a fragile bridge built on their son's well-being. Ilara found herself spending more time in Kaelin's presence, learning to navigate the demanding routine of the Alpha's life. She saw the heavy cloak of responsibility he carried, the endless political demands, and the constant threat of rivals that had forced him to become the cold, calculating leader she now resented. One afternoon, Kaelin was overseeing a strategy session with his war council. Ilara, watching from the balcony of their shared private lounge, was startled to see Rorik, the beta, suddenly challenge Kaelin's authority on a vital defensive maneuver. The tension in the hall was instantaneous, palpable. The pack held its breath. Kaelin didn't raise his voice. He didn't even shift. He simply fixed Rorik with a look of such absolute, chilling dominance that the beta's challenge withered on his tongue. Kaelin's control was terrifyingly perfect. Later, Kaelin returned to the lounge, exhausted, the alpha mask cracking under the strain. He sank onto the sofa, running a hand through his hair, his golden eyes dull with fatigue. He was not the monster, but a man holding an empire together with sheer will. Ilara approached him cautiously, holding a steaming mug of her favourite herbal tea, a small, domestic gesture that felt alien in the fortress. She placed it on the table beside him. "You should not have challenged Rorik in front of the council," she said, her voice low. "It shows weakness. You need to present a united front." Kaelin laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You lecture me on pack politics, Omega?" "I lecture you on survival, Alpha," she corrected. "I watched your father rule. I know what it takes. And I know the moment you show a crack, someone will strike, especially now that you have a young heir, a vulnerability you never had before." Kaelin looked at her, truly looked at her, and the Alpha's facade dropped completely. He was just Kaelin, the driven, sometimes reckless male she had loved before his ascension. "You are right," he admitted, a rare moment of vulnerability. "And I hate that you are right. This burden, it is heavier than I ever imagined. The only reason I demanded the collateral was because I was desperate for something to leverage against the last of the Shadowpack's allies. I never intended to harm a child. I swear that. Ilara felt her anger soften, melting under the unexpected honesty. I know, she whispered. I see you. Underneath the Alpha, you are still the boy who hated the brutality of your father's rule. And you are still the only one who ever saw past the power, Kaelin murmured, reaching out and gently taking her hand. His touch was a jolt, a physical confirmation of the fated bond. I never stopped loving you, Ilara. I just buried it under duty. I chose the pack, and I have regretted that choice every moment of the last 6 years. Can you forgive the Alpha for the mistakes of the man? Ilara looked down at their joined hands, the scarred, massive hand of the Alpha holding the slender, worn hand of the Omega. The memory of his past betrayal was a deep, aching wound, but the man before her, tired and earnest, was asking for a second chance. Not just for them, but for their son. The bond was throbbing, a deep, insistent pulse that demanded surrender. She said nothing, but she did not pull her hand away. The following weeks were a tentative journey toward reconciliation. Ilara did not forgive Kaelin instantly, but she stopped fighting the inevitable. They were fated. They were bound by their son. She allowed the mate bond to settle, the connection offering a protective, if complicated, comfort. Kaelin began to officially introduce Orion to the Pack Elders and other Alphas, making the bold, unprecedented move of naming him his heir. The announcement was met with skepticism, but Kaelin's word was law. He was fiercely protective, a wall of power surrounding Ilara and Orion. One evening, after Orion was asleep, Ilara found Kaelin in his private study, hunched over the ancient ledger that detailed the crippling debt his father had imposed upon the Shadow Pack, the true source of the collateral demand. Kaelin looked up, his golden eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. I am dismantling it, Ilara, the ledger, the old laws, all of it. I will not have my pack ruled by debt and fear. You are risking everything, she warned, knowing that such a radical change would embolden his rivals. I risked everything when I demanded my son as a debt payment, he said, a grim line to his mouth. The Alpha I was then was a monster. The man I want to be is the father of Orion. I will be worthy of him, and of you. He stood and walked toward her. This time, there was no dominance in his step, only the certainty of a male claiming what was rightfully his. He stopped directly in front of her, and the connection between them, now fully acknowledged, thrummed with overwhelming power. The debt is paid, Ilara, he murmured, his gaze locking with hers. Paid with the truth, with my humility, and with the presence of our son. But I owe you something more. I owe you our life together. He leaned down and finally, after 6 years of silence, his lips claimed hers. The kiss was not the demanding, passionate kiss of their youth, but a slow, tender confirmation of their bond, a silent promise. It was the taste of redemption, of a broken past giving way to an uncertain but united future. The true power of the Crimson Claw lay not in the Alpha's ruthlessness, but in the family he had finally fought to reclaim. As the moon rose high over the Crimson Citadel, casting a silvery glow over their embraced figures, Ilara finally surrendered the last of her fear. The debt was settled. The Alpha's cold heart had been cracked open by the undeniable love for his son, and in the space where the monster had been, a mate and a father stood ready to claim his destiny. She was home, not as a prisoner of his power, but as the Luna of his heart and the mother of his heir. Mother of his heir.